Hello, I'm Casey.
And I'm Fallon.
And this is
Render the Darkness.
I swear, I intentionally started talking before you were completely settled, so I would have less to edit in the videos.
Lovely.
It's my new plan.
Okay.
Can't edit it if I'm talking.
This is true. Or we could just go ahead and just edit it anyway.
But then they wouldn't hear all of the words I have to say. That would take away the joy.
Okay.
And it might be confusing.
Yeah, it probably would be a lot really confusing. Anywho, hi.
We just start doing the videos as if we're like cutting out halfway through. What the tunnel? That's it.
Okay.
If anybody didn't know, I said it, and then I went through the tunnel. Did you get it? You put that together without me forming the full sentence? I'm not sure that you did. Next time I do that, I'm going to be like, Fallon, what did I say? And if you don't get it right, then I'm going to be like, for those that obviously didn't know.
Why are you so mean? Is it one of them days for you? I have a feeling it's one of them days for you.
Sorry.
It's
all right.
Okay.
Let's just get on over to our fun fact for this episode. The Girl Scouts of the USA was founded in 1912. On March 12th, actually. So coming up pretty soon. That's my daughter's birthday, March 12th. Obviously not 1912, but the March 12th part. Anyway, they were founded by a lady named Juliette Gordon Lowe, and they were formed in Savannah, Georgia, the first one.
Oh, that's cool. I wonder when they started doing the cookies. I love Girl Scout cookies.
Hey, it's 'tis the season, obviously. I've been seeing them around everywhere, and it has taken every bit of self-restraint I have to not stop and get 20 boxes of Thin Mints.
I want some.
They are everywhere.
I haven't seen any yet.
They were stationed out in front of Walmart yesterday. They were stationed out in front of Five Below today.
I was at Walmart yesterday. I didn't see them.
I guess we're not allowed to say those store names. Walmart and Five Below. We're not sponsored. Just to be safe.
I'm sure we're okay just talking about them. I mean, everybody goes to the Wally Mart and the Target.
Yeah. I don't think we said Target, did we? We said Five Below.
Well, no, I'm just throwing Target in there because everybody goes to Target, right?
Well, I mean, not everybody has a Target. We don't have a Target. Like, our closest Target is an hour away from here.
Yeah, but we still have access to a Target.
If you drive an hour away from here.
Yeah. But we still have the access.
If you don't have a vehicle, it would be very difficult.
Yes, that is true. Yes, that is
true. So my point still stands. Not everybody has. Why are you being so mean? Are you just doing those moves today? This is what we're going to do today?
Yeah, that's what we're going to do today. I got to match the energy.
Speaking of mean, I'm sure there's at least one mean person in your case, so. Segue. Ta-da.
Oh, are you getting tired of talking about Target?
No, I can talk about Target all day. All day. See what I did there? Target all day.
Yeah,
Dr. Seuss, welcome back. You ruined my segue.
I'm sorry. But yes, there is. This case is pretty sad. It's tragic. Just gonna let you know before I even start that it does get pretty graphic in the case, and there is mention of sexual assault. So if it's something that is triggering for you, or you don't want to hear about it, completely understand. You either skip this, or I'm gonna let you know when I'm fixing to say it, so you can either skip over that part. But there is going to be a second part as well. But we are going to be talking about the tragic and horrific murder of Ella Barham. Again, like I said, this is going to be a two-part episode because there is so much about this case that I feel two parts would be best. Now, this is the third case out of Arkansas in our 50-state series. This case was solved, but some people believe that the person convicted may have been the wrong person. I also found a really good book called Remembering Ella, a 1912 murder mystery in the Arkansas Ozarks by Nita Gould that had a lot of information and details that I will link in the show notes if you'd like to find out more. Ella Lillian Ethel Barham was born on February 16, 1894, in Pleasant Ridge, Arkansas. Her father's name was George Solomon Barham, who was born on May 19, 1852, in Johnson County, Arkansas. Her mother's name was Nancy Delilah Dorothea Belvins, who was born on January 1st, 1868, in Boone County. She had two sisters named Gertrude Priscilla and Ruth Pearl. She also had three brothers named Doy Belvins, Edgar Peel, and George Dennis. Now, when Ella was born, her mother was more than likely helped by a midwife who was referred to at the time as granny women. Now, granny women were said to have used different methods to help with childbirth, like herbs and medicines, but they were also known to use superstitions. The granny women would have given blackberry root tea as a way to stop bleeding and to help relax the muscles. They were said to have possibly put a knife or scissors under the bed during birth to cut the pain in half. Now, after the baby was born, they may have used urine from the mother to stop any possible eye infections.
This sounds awful.
Especially the urine part. I don't understand how that would prevent infections, but
This is absolutely horrible. Thank God we live in a time where childbirth and delivery is, for those who choose the medical route, not only more sanitary, but safer,
yes.
a little less brutal for the mom.
Yeah. Now, her dad was one of the few people who had a very large amount of land at 725 acres. Now, a lot of the land was used for farming, but not all of it. Some of it was actually used to mine zinc. He also owned a general store in Pleasant Ridge that they would use to sell vegetables from their farm. When Ella was younger, she would walk to Jones School with her brothers and sisters, using a series of books for elementary school called Guffey Readers. She learned to read and write and would learn other studies as well, like math, history, spelling, and geography. During the time period, it was pretty common for women to only go to school to the 8th grade, and since she was the oldest of the girls, she was relied on to help her mother around the farm and the house. Now, after school, Ella would help her mom and sisters in the garden, and it seemed like she had a green thumb because she was able to keep plants alive and help them thrive. One thing she really loved was flowers. She would make sure to have a lot in bloom. Now, her mother would teach her other skills as well, like cooking, how to raise chickens, and to use them for food and sewing. When Ella wasn't at home or at school, she liked to visit with her friends. She would often walk, ride a horse, or go by horse-drawn buggy. At the time, there were some cars and bikes, but because of the terrain, they weren't much use. Now, there were trains that the family would use to visit other places, but they didn't go often, and Ella really didn't go too far away from town. Now, during Ella's lifetime, there was a phone system in Harrison, but there wasn't one in her house. The Spanish War happened, and when she was 6, there was electricity available in certain areas of Boone County, but not until the 1940s did it become available in rural areas. Silent movies had made their way to Harrison in 1911. Now, even though times were hard during that period, Ella had a romantic life as well, and she had a lot of men that were interested in her. There were men who would write her saying how much they adored her and how she would even get letters from men that she had actually never met. One man did eventually win her heart, whose name was James Cameron, who was 19 at the time. And he would also send her letters that told of his affection for her. However, none of the letters found really indicated her feelings towards him. Now, before her untimely death, he wrote 2 letters to her that talked about not being able to see each other and how he was actually seeing another girl on Sunday, and that if she still wanted to see him, that she could another day.
Oh.
Now, even though
away from that dude.
Yeah, it's kind of weird how he was just like so forthcoming, like, "Hey, I'm gonna go see another girl Sunday," but
I mean, maybe they hadn't like made it official. Like maybe they hadn't established that it was going to be. There's a word. What is that word? You know what word I'm trying to think of, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you make it like a permanent, like you officialize the fact that it'll be just the two of you. Oh, what is that word?
Oh man, make it. No, I don't know. I'm sure we'll think of it. Now, even though no one really knew for sure, both of their families believed that they had been engaged. And Cameron had loved Ella for his entire life, according to his son. Now, November 21st, 1912, the morning started like any other day. Ella got up, got dressed, and she put on her back comb, which is a decoration that is worn in the hair. She helped her mother with breakfast, and the family sat down and ate, talking about their plans for the day. Now, it was a Thursday, and for them it was normally wash day, and Ella would usually help her mother, But on this day, she decided to make a trip to town. Now, she put on her hat before leaving, which was a blue braided tam o' shanter cap. If you don't know what a tam o' shanter cap is, it is a Scottish cap with like a fuzzy ball on top of it.
That sounds cute.
Yeah, I've seen them like, and I tried to find pictures of it, but yeah, it's like the little plaid little hat. I guess it didn't have to be plaid. Anyway. Now Ella wanted to make a hat, so she went to a store to get the fabric, only having to go over one hill. Normally, to get to most places, she would have to go through creeks, hills, and other rough terrain. Now, it didn't take long for Ella to go back home, but she didn't stay long, because even though she was skilled at sewing, she knew she was going to need some help with the hat. So she left to go to her neighbor's Veda Bryant to see if she could offer her assistance. Now she thought it would be better to ride a horse instead of walking. And her brother kept one on the farm, even though him and his wife lived pretty close by in their own house. Now, with all the stuff needed, she set out for a ride. She went to the barn.
Exclusive. That's the word.
Oh, exclusive. Okay.
Sorry. Exclusive. That's the word.
Now, with all the stuff needed to set out for a ride, she went to the barn around 9 a.m. and got Nellie prepared and set out. Now, on her way, she passed by the house of the Davidsons. When she went by the porch, she said hello to 17-year-old Laird Davis, and his brother Otis, who was downstairs of the house, actually heard them talking as she went by. Now, a little before 10 a.m., Ella tied her horse to the tree in the front yard of the Bryant house. Veda wasn't able to help with the hat, but Ella stayed and visited with her for about 45 minutes before heading back home. On her way back, she stopped by the Davidsons' home again and spoke to Nancy and her daughter Iva about an illness going around in their family. And she had asked Ella if they had had any medicine left from their recent bout. During this time, it was pretty normal for families to share medications. And Ella said that they did, but it wasn't as potent as before. Now, Ella's mom was starting to get worried when she still wasn't home, and at this point, it was in the early evening hours. So she had asked her two oldest boys to go out and see if they could find her. Doy and Peel got on their horses and went to Kilbrew Ford on Crooked Creek. Now, they didn't see any sign of Ella. Now, to cover more ground, the brothers decided to split up, with Peel going towards Davidson Graveyard, thinking that it was the way that she more likely took, and Doy looking in the woods close by in case she went another way. Now, it didn't take long for people in the area to hear about Ella's disappearance, so friends started going door to door trying to find any information that they could. Peel went by the graveyard, finding nothing, and then went to the Davidsons' home. When he got there, he seen Lair standing by the woodpile and asked him if he had seen his sister. Lair did say that he'd seen her and that she came back to their house on her way back home and spoke with his mother and sister. Peel went back home and told his family what Lair said. Now, they didn't understand how no one's seen her since she left the Davidsons' home. They wondered if maybe Lair had mistaken and maybe she went to visit someone else. So he decided to go back to the Davidsons' home, and when he got there, he talked to Nancy. She said that Ella did come by their house, and she had spoken to her while she was passing by. She said that she looked like she was going home when she left, and that was the last time she had seen her. Now, at this point, Peel is getting really worried. So he leaves and goes to his uncle's house, James Bowman, to see if he had seen her, but he hadn't. Now, James thought that the best course of action would be to get Charlie Patterson to help, thinking because he had once been in the running for Marion County Sheriff, his experience would be very useful. Now, the news of Ella's disappearance grew very quickly, even in different areas, so the amount of people looking began to increase as the time went on. They were searching the woods, the creeks, and the side of the road while calling her name. And during this, the men that were in the woods joined in the search with their dogs. People kept arriving at Kilbrew Ford waiting to see if anyone had found anything new. Some of the people that were there were J.H. Stewart, Dalton Davis, and his brother Virgil. Otis and Lair showed up a little while later with their sisters. Otis went and sat on a creek bank and watched as more people showed up, staying to himself. When Peel got back, he seen his mom and dad crying, and he also seen that Otis was on the creek bank. Doy came back around 7 p.m., and he had seen Otis by himself next to a small fire, and he had asked him if he would go with him to try and find Ella. Otis declined, saying that he had to go back home with his sister Ivy. Doy again tried to get Otis to help, and he did change his mind and started to walk off with Doy, but before they could get very far, Ivy had reminded him that he had to take them home. Around that time, all the men thought it would be better to take all of the women home. So Otis and Lair took their sisters home, and Peel went back to his parents' home. A little while later, his dad came home and asked if he would go out and look again. So Peel left and went to Dutch Young's place, and the two men searched the woods close to Young's house. Crossed the creek, and after a mile returned to Kilbrew Ford, but no one was there. They left and went south toward Barham's house, and around 8:30 p.m. they found Ella's horse in George Barham's field. The horse was going away from the house, and she still had her saddle on, but no bridle. Dutch took the horse to the house, and Peel went home to let his parents know what they had found and left the house again to continue the search. After Nellie was found about 30 minutes later, Patterson and Bohm were close to Dutch Young's spring when they met Peel and another man. The four of them went to go down into a hollow. Then, when two boys who had their dogs with them came running down the north side of the hill that was close to Dutch Young's field, yelling that they had found Ella. I'm just going to let you know, this is where it's going to get a little graphic. So, laying on a bluff a quarter of a mile from the Davidson graveyard, the men reached Ella's body. She had been cut into 5 pieces and placed in different places around the bluff. She had been decapitated, both of her legs had been removed, and her midsection had been cut in 2. Her head and one of her legs were found near a small tree. Her other leg was found over 25 feet away by a larger tree. They found her hips west of that tree and her arms and legs east of that tree. And her clothes had been thrown in the middle of the 2 trees. Now, some of the other men had heard the screams of the boys and ran to where Ella was. One of the men left to get Kansas Davidson, the justice of the peace at the time. While they waited, Patterson and some of the other men got Ella's body and covered her with her clothes. Now, a couple of the people were sent to Harrison and Yellville to tell the Boone County Sheriff James W. Helm and the Marion County Sheriff August Harlan Flippin about what they had discovered.
I could not imagine.
Yeah, it was.
I could not imagine having to collect the pieces of my family member or my loved one's body to put in a place where I could cover them to give them some kind of last minutes of decency the best you could in that, like, to be able to even have the ability to do that is just astonishing to me because I couldn't do it.
Oh, there's no way. Some of the men took Ella's body and her clothes to the Barham house. All of her belongings were found except for her hat, which wasn't located. 2 of the doctors were called to the home on Friday morning at 12 a.m. after Delia passed out after hearing of her daughter's murder. The doctors did look at Ella's body, but spent most of the time trying to console her distraught mother.
I can imagine.
No,
I would be inconsolable. There would be nothing you could do for me.
No. Like I said, I can't even think of it now, like wrap my brain around it. Now, the rest of her family wouldn't allow her to view Ella's body because they didn't want the last time that she's seen her to be in that state. Now, it said that Delilah actually prayed for the person that murdered her daughter and repeatedly said, "Oh God, help the one who killed my little girl, help the man who killed her." Now, the 2 doctors left the Barham house sometime around 3 a.m. and went to Kansas Davidson's to eat breakfast and give their horses some food. When they got there, Candace was talking to Patterson and Dutch. Candace had asked Patterson to come over to help summon a coroner's jury and to start to investigate the murder. Now, the Arkansas law gives all the authority of a coroner if the actual coroner couldn't be there or if they lived more than 25 miles away from the place that the crime happened. Now, because Dr. Kirby, the Boone County coroner, lived in Harrison, he couldn't get there, so Kansas was tasked with getting 12 jurors, and he had the authority to summon witnesses and hand out subpoenas. So around 5 a.m., Otis went into the room dressed in gray pants, coat, vest, and his shoes on. And he had stayed in the room for a minute before leaving and continued to look in the room on several occasions. Now, Lair looked into the room around 7 a.m., and at around 7:30 a.m., Otis was standing outside of the room, seeming to be listening to what was going on. Now, Kansas would have Patterson give Otis and Lair subpoenas to be witnesses at the inquest. But Otis left before Patterson could do so. Now, the doctors then left to go and do an official examination of Ella's body in front of the 12 jurors.
Okay, so I'm just going to say this, and I don't know where this is going because I've never heard this case before, but Otis is seeming a little suspicious.
Yeah, he's...
Otis has got some pretty strange behaviors going on for the situation, I think.
Yeah, he's acting a little...
He's trying to distance himself quite a bit for a situation he should be wanting to be involved in.
Yeah, and then trying to listen.
And then, trying to see what they're doing and where they're at. And there's something off about old Otis here. That's just my suspicion.
Yeah, like I said, he is acting very strange. Okay, so again, I'm going to warn you here. This does get pretty graphic, and there is also mention of sexual assault. I am going to leave out the really explicit content, but if you want to know all of the details, you can find it in the book. I just don't feel comfortable saying some of the details because they were pretty bad. So, now during that time, doctors didn't have a lot of medical tools that they could use. They did have like scalpels, knives, scissors, clamps, needles, and sutures. They weren't able, or they, sorry, there weren't any labs close by to test any substances that they might find, and they didn't have any microscopes either. The doctor started on the examination starting with Ella's head. They found that her skull had been crushed, all the bones were broken, and an inch and a half of the front of her skull was missing, exposing part of her brain.
Oh my goodness.
Her left jawbone was broken in two. The right part of her nose was missing, as well as her eyelids.
Oh my goodness.
Her right eye had been busted open, and her left was bruised. On the
Oh
right, yeah,
God.
on the right side of her face, the skin was missing, exposing her teeth. There were other very brutal findings, and it was determined that Ella had been sexually assaulted because they had found semen. Now, the doctors concluded that an axe was used to dismember her body. They also concluded that her cause of death was extreme trauma to her head.
Oh my gosh.
They estimated her time of death to be around 11 a.m., not long after she left the Davidson home.
Poor girl.
Yeah, it is terrible. It took me a little bit to write that part, to be honest.
Oh my gosh.
Now, after the doctors finished the autopsy, Ella was prepared to be buried. The custom at the time was for people outside of the family to wash her body. They wrapped her in a cloth called winding sheets and laid a large white cloth over her. Ella was then placed into a coffin, and the coffin was placed into a wagon, and the procession started. On the way to the Davidson graveyard, they made sure not to stop because they believed if they did, someone else in the family would pass within a year. The service didn't last long, but Ella's mom would repeat the words that she had said about her daughter's killer. Other women cried, and men that were clearly upset made sure to try and calm the women. Everyone waited while Ella was lowered into the grave and buried, because they believed that if they left early, they thought it would bring bad luck or death, and they also thought it would be pretty disrespectful. Now, James Helm, the Boone County Sheriff, received the message about what had happened to Ella. He'd asked the messenger a couple of questions and told him that he would get on it as soon as possible. Sheriff Helm knew that the news had more than likely reached Marion County Sheriff Flippin because he was closer to Pleasant Ridge than to Harrison, and assumed that he was already on his way there. Now, he got into contact with Sheriff Jones and told him to get to Pleasant Ridge as soon as he could to investigate what had happened. Now, thinking maybe that a homeless person had committed the crime, he gathered some men and deputized them. He had different groups assigned to different areas of two major railroads in the area, one being Missouri and North Arkansas that went through Harrison and Olvie, I'm going to say, and the Missouri Pacific White River Division that went through Zinc. He told them to arrest anyone that looked suspicious. Now, Sheriff Helm really wanted to find a way to be able to track the killer, so he had asked the senator to talk to Governor George W. Donaghy to see if he could get some bloodhounds. The governor called and left a message for Hames A. Pitcock, who was the superintendent for the Arkansas State Penitentiary in Little Rock, asking for the aid of their bloodhounds. But the dogs were at a convict farm being used to locate escaped criminals. So Sheriff Helm tried many times to find dogs to help in the search, but was ultimately unable to do so. There was one detective named Sampley that had a couple of tracker dogs, and he was willing to go to Harrison, but he had missed the train on Friday and decided not to go Saturday because the scent would have dissipated. Now, November 22nd at around 8 a.m., J.H. Stewart started to search to see if he could find any of the evidence. He started where Ella had been found, then he went to Davidson Cemetery and searched around, and he made a very important discovery. Close to the southwest corner of the graveyard on the road, he found a trail of blood leading to a large fallen treetop. He inspected the tree and noticed smashed leaves and sticks that had formed the outline of a body, and the ground was covered in blood. After finding this, he believed that Ella was pulled from the road and was murdered on the treetop. Now, sometime between the hours of 10 a.m. and 11 a.m., Bentley Bedford Brown and some of his friends went to the crime scene because he wanted to be able to find something that might help find out who had murdered Ella. When they arrived at the Crooked Creek, they went and talked to a group of men that were standing on the bank. They told Bentley that they had found bare footprints in the mud and that they looked like they had belonged to an adult. So Bentley went to investigate the prints that began on the north bank, went over through a marsh and a creek, and went up the south side of the creek. Thankfully, someone had the mind to preserve two of the prints, and they used leaves and sticks to do so. He decided to measure the prints, and he used a stick that he noticed that he notched out for his measurements. Now, he measured the length and the width of the prints, how far apart the toes were, and the length and the width of the big toe and heel. But for some reason, he didn't measure the distance between steps, which would have helped to find out how tall the person was that had killed Ella. Now, the newspaper started to publish articles about the murder, and one of them described the murder as, quote, one of the most atrocious murders ever committed in this section of the state. It's not known where they got their information or if maybe someone thought it would boost sales, but some of the press started to print information about the murder that wasn't at all true. On Saturday, the paper articles took a horrific turn by saying that Ella was found when a pack of hunting dogs alerted their owners to her body, and when they got there, she was being eaten by hogs. The papers would go on to get a number of the facts wrong as well, like getting people's names and their ages wrong, among a lot of other things.
What is the point of that? Why are they making up details that don't exist?
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if where they got it, or like I said, if maybe they were just making things up to try to sell papers, or.
That makes zero sense to me.
Now let's talk a little bit more about Otis.
Oh, Otis.
Otis.
I've got suspicions about you, Otis. I don't trust you, Otis.
Now there isn't a lot of information on Otis.
I imagine not. He tried to stay away as much as he could. Otis was terrified.
Yep. Now, but what we do know is that he was born on January 22nd, 1883, to Kansas and Nancy Davidson, and he had 10 siblings. At the time of Ella's murder, he was 29 years old, single, and living with his parents. He was tall, had dark hair, and he had a stocky build. He didn't really have a lot of running with the police, but he did once get charged with a misdemeanor, but it's not really known for what. Now, Otis usually kept to himself. He liked to stay in his room a lot and play the fiddle. He also loved to hunt and trap and would go out every day after finishing his work on the farm to check them. Otis did have a girlfriend by the name of Cora Potts, but people think that he liked Ella because they did find a note from him expressing how he felt about her.
Was it a note to her or just a note that he had just written?
It was a note to her.
Oh, okay. So he had told her, expressed to her. Okay.
Yeah. Now, at this point in time, Ella's dad, George, was sure that Otis had something to do with the death of his daughter.
I feel like that.
Now, on Friday, between the hours of 10 and 11 p.m., Sheriff Helm and some other men went to the Davidson home with an arrest warrant for Otis. Helm stayed at the door and had the rest of the men surround the home. Andrew W. Smith, the Zinc Justice of the Peace, went to the northeast corner. Going to the left was going to the left of Smith were William Finley Hammond, a constable, and Constable D.L. Edmonds, who were from Harrison. They positioned themselves about 6 to 8 feet apart underneath the east upstairs window. At the southeast corner was A.L. Matlock, and the rest of the house was guarded by David Ragsdale, Deputy Sheriffs Bert Taylor, and James Jones. Now, after everyone was in place, Sheriff Helm knocked on the door and asked for Kansas. Kansas opened the door, and Helm told him that he had a warrant for Otis's arrest and asked if he was home. And Kansas said yes, and he yelled for Otis to come downstairs. Now, just a few minutes later, Edmonds, Matlock, Hammond, and Smith heard something coming from above them. When they looked up, they seen a hand drop something out of the window.
Uh-oh.
Now, Hammond lit a match so that men could see what it was, and laying at their feet was a pair of socks.
What are you up to, Otis?
Now, they noticed that there was sand, gravel, and another unidentified substance inside. They took some of that substance out, and Smith decided to taste it. Don't know why.
What?
Yep.
What?
That's what I thought. I was like, okay.
You don't even know what that is.
Yeah. But he decided to taste it, and
oh my god!
And he found out it was red pepper. And they all knew that it could be used to throw off a dog's smell.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I just found this fact.
Otis came downstairs into the room where Kansas and Helm were talking. Helm told him that he was there to arrest him for the crime against Ella. Now, Otis didn't resist in any way, and he just went back upstairs and finished getting dressed.
You're guilty, Otis.
Helm took him out and had Taylor and Jones take him to Harrison.
The jig is up, Otis.
Edmonds and some of the other men went with them. The other men stayed to try and search the Davidson home, but because there wasn't much light, they would have to stay until daylight to do a more thorough search.
Why didn't they just come back?
Well, because they didn't want anybody to go in there and try to mess
Oh,
with
okay.
anything
Oh,
or
I
try
gotcha.
to.
Gotcha. What about when they were asleep?
They probably didn't sleep. They may have took shifts or something.
Oh.
I'm just assuming. It didn't really say. I'm just assuming that's probably what they did.
What if one was asleep and the other one had to go to the bathroom?
Maybe he woke up. While in jail, Otis was given the opportunity to make a statement, but he declined.
Of course he did.
Now then Edmund put the socks in front of him on the table and asked if he had seen them before. Now, Otis didn't reply right away, and then he said, quote, "I don't know." And he tossed them back, saying, quote, "Nobody can use me." But apparently he was never asked about what he had meant by it.
Yeah, what does that mean? Nobody can use me?
Now that Tuesday, the preliminary hearing was set to start at 10 a.m. in Zinc. Now Saturday, the newspapers were printing articles about Otis being arrested. The Arkansas Democrat would print an article that told correct information about how the arrest went and who was involved. However, some of the other papers were full of very inaccurate information, again, about the arrest and who arrested him.
Why do they think that helps? What do they think that helps?
I don't know.
I mean, even if, let's say you put in some false information and that sells you a crap ton of copies. But then they find out that you lied and your facts weren't straight. Now all you've done is discredited the name of whatever the paper is, and now people aren't going to trust whatever you post from that point forward.
Yeah.
Like, you might as well call yourself an Inquirer.
I used to like that magazine. But like I said, again, the other papers, they were printing very inaccurate information. Some said that Otis locked himself in his room, and some said that he had to be moved due to a possible mob, all of which was not true. Now, there were some other suspects at the time of Otis's arrest. Two brothers who were arrested for a different crime confessed to robbing and the burning of a store that was in Summit, Arkansas. Supposedly, they were found with a bloody knife and had bloodstains on the clothes. And they both said that they had knew Ella.
Okay.
Now, after a few days, they were brought back to Arkansas and were questioned by the Marion County officials and were actually cleared of having anything to do with the murder.
Okay.
Now, a newspaper called the Fort Smith Record talked about another man that was seen in a saloon on Garrison Avenue that had blood on his clothing.
What is with all these people running around with blood on their clothes?
Maybe they're hunters? Farmers?
That's a little weird. That's a lot of that's 3 people so far just randomly found walking around with blood on their clothes.
Now, after being made aware of the man, the police tried to locate him, thinking that he may have had something to do with Ella's death, but they never were able to find him.
You know who they really should have stayed focused on? Otis.
Well, I mean, he is, in custody still. So.
Well, I know, but they haven't proved him one way or the other. They just arrested him, and then that's it. They started looking for more people.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. But it's an interesting case.
Yeah. But I mean, you gotta kind of
consider the time frame.
Yeah. Now, the fact that people outside of Boone County didn't believe that Otis was involved didn't really matter. What did matter was that Ella's dad believed he did, and he let everyone know it, and his words were good enough for the people. Mm-hmm. Now, as they continued to look for evidence, it is said there were threats of a lynch mob getting together. So the Harrison officers had to put a lot more protection around the jail to protect him from becoming victim to the people. So that is where I'm going to leave you for part 1.
Dang it. I want to know what happens. I want to know if Otis gets found guilty.
Like I said, there is going to be a next step, part 2, and to be honest, there possibly could be a part 3. This thing is huge.
Yeah, that's what she said.
It's terrible.
Sorry.
It's terrible. But yeah, it's crazy. Like I said, it's strange that we didn't know about this.
I've never heard of this case, not one time ever.
And then getting into it, I was like, oh, this is gonna be interesting, and it's just there's more and more and more, and yeah, it's.
So your stomach?
Yeah.
Did you just growl at me from the inside of your belly?
I did. I'm hungry.
It's an angry goblin in her belly right now. It just growled at me. I was like, how dare you be this interested in this case for the first time ever? Fine.
Yeah.
Well, I am intrigued and interested, and I really want to know if Otis is the one who gets convicted, or if there's another like 5 random blood-covered people that they arrest that could be one of the suspects.
There could be, because apparently that was part of the. I was trying to think of what I was gonna say. I lost it. Just went.
Okay. See you later, Fallon.
Yep. I was gonna say part of the fashion back then. Just always having blood on.
Apparently, no, that was
For
just
men,
like a
anyway.
thing that men did, and it was completely acceptable to society.
Which, like I said, I mean, a lot of men, are farmers and hunters and stuff. So maybe that's why there was blood on a lot of guys all the time.
They didn't change before they went eating a beat.
Maybe they just went and butchered a hog and decided to go have a beer.
Oh,
just walking up in there with yucky stuff on them.
Gnarly. So for Arkansas, it's going to be extended just a little bit because we now have at least a 2-part episode, which was not the original plan in that. And also, I will have a bonus episode for Arkansas. That was a listener recommendation. I will tell you guys about that when we get to it, which will be after she finishes letting us know what's happening in this case. And I just want you guys to know that does not mean that we have any favoritism towards Arkansas.
It does seem like we
It
do.
just happens to be that this is so far. I mean, this is where we're from, and a lot of, not a lot, but some of our followers are people who are local to the area. So, we got a lot of recommendations for Arkansas, and we are trying to fit them all in before we move on to another state. And we'll do that for any state that we come across. So if you guys have recommendations, I don't care if we get 4 or 5 recommendations for a state. We'll knock out all of those cases for that state before we move on to the next state. So you do still have time to get your recommendations in for all the other states we have not covered, which is literally any state that does not start with an A. Yeah. So you have time. If you have them, please get them in. I promise we will cover them. But we can only cover them, before we get to the state or while we're still on the state. Because once we move past it, we'll still cover it, but it'll have to be after the 50-state series.
Right.
Other than that, if you like what we're doing, you're interested in what we're doing, you like our content, you like us, you don't like us, whatever, like and subscribe anyway, and share. That really helps us out a lot. It takes like 2 seconds for you to push a button. We really appreciate you guys for spending time with us and hanging out. And we're also fixing to start pumping out a lot of more lives that we'll be doing, probably on TikTok mostly.
Yeah.
So please be sure that you're following us over there so you can follow along if that's something that you're interested in seeing as well. You see how much we mess up on our edited stuff. So imagine how fun it is when we're live.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
You get to see all the bloopers.
Yeah.
And there be some blooping. So, other than that, we hope to see you guys on the next episode.
Yep.
And as always, appreciate your support. And we are Render the Darkness. Sorry, I watched The Floor yesterday. Rob Lowe.
The Floor?
Yeah, Rob Lowe. He's the one in Wayne's World that's.
Oh, yeah.
Forward to him on his scene. Anyways. Not sponsored. But every time I see his face, that's all I can see is when they're like, and then it goes to him. Do you remember Wayne's World?
Yes.
Do you remember Rob Lowe in Wayne's World?
Yeah, but whenever you said you've seen The Floor, that's
well, he's the host. He's the host of The Floor. So every time I see him,
it's a show.
It's a show. Yeah,
I thought it was a movie. I was like,
not sponsored, but yeah, no, it's a show that he's the host of. We're in the middle of watching season 2 right now of it.
Ooh, I didn't know that. That's why I was confused.
Yeah, if you haven't watched it, again, not sponsored. If you haven't watched it though, like it's currently one of my household's favorite shows. We love watching it. It's super fun. You can play along with it, which makes it even better.
I like interactive.
And shows. Rob Lowe hosts it, so
he's pretty cool.
Nobody can be mad at watching Rob Lowe for any amount of time, I don't think. Because he's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys for spending time with us. We really appreciate it. And again, for the third time in this episode, in case you don't know who we are Render the Darkness.
Bye for real this time.
For real.